Small, hairy, and all too happy to get into a scrap, Call of Duty fanboys are one hell of a scourge on the earth. But while the boffin's out back trying to find a solution to that issue, let's have a chat about another small hairy species, the Dwarves. Now, the Dowie, as the well-educated and nerdy call them, are generally seen as one of the good guys of the Warhammer world, but I say good guys with air quotes, which you can't see anyway, because in the world of Warhammer, everyone will want to kill everyone else sooner or later, regardless of whether or not you think Chaos to the North are a bunch of wankers or not. That said, you can usually rely on the bearded ankle choppers to do the right thing when needed, and happily bisect orcs, undead, beastmen, chaos, Norse, dark elves, Skaven, and Varak with gusto. Nestled in their dwarven mountain homes, these diminutive alcoholics hold grudges as well as their beer and love a good scrap. So let's have a look-see at their legendary lords, heroes, infantry, missile infantry, cavalry, war machines, wizards, and monsters, shall we? So to kick off, let us take a look at these diminutive lords of the Dwarven Kingdoms, of which there are several. The obvious start would be Thorgrim Grudgebearer, the High Ruler of Karazakarak. Sorry, you have to pronounce these places on force or end up in the Book of Grudges. Located in the World's Edge Mountains. A fairly decent start point with well-protected approaches but plenty of options for expansion. He's the ultimate ruler of all the Dwarven Kingdoms and eager to reclaim lost holdings from the ancient enemy of the Dowie, the Greenskins. Thorgrim is a progressive leader, not content to sit on ancient Dwarven laurels. He's ready to make the changes necessary to get things going when needed. As such, he's well liked by other Dwarven Kingdoms and gains a bonus to diplomacy with them. If anyone can strike out all the names in the Book of Grudges, it's Thorgrim. Clearly, being the king of Dwarvenkind grants specific benefits. Unlimited beer, saucy bearded wenches at all times, the first dibs on any Arkenstones, and of course, not having to use your legs anymore. Thorgrim is literally carried by his team, which in-game is considered as a mount, though I doubt the dwarves carrying him would like that label, to be honest. In battle, it does help though. Thorgrim is a truck that rams into enemy units with glee and can do plenty of damage with his attacks, while also debuffing his enemies and buffing nearby Dowie. His high armour and hit points allow him to stay in the fight for an entire battle, but does suffer when forced into a duel with characters geared to topple heroes and lords. Keep him away from those duelists, however, and this armoured melee specialist will do plenty of the, legwork? For you on the battlefield. Sticking with the World's Edge Mountains, our next Dwarven legendary lord is the Slayer King, Ungrim Ironfist. He grows restless, and wants nothing better than to powerbomb the opposition into submission as the leader of the Karakadrin faction. Being more northerly compared to Thorgrim, Ungrim's immediate neighbours are your usual Groby, dwarf for goblins, and general greenskins for the noobs, get with the programme, but also the local edgelord vampires. Being a Slayer himself, he naturally conveys bonus damage to other Slayer units in his army, makes them cheaper to maintain, and all Slayers within his army gain Journey's End, which is a nifty buff that prevents them from dying so long as the ability's active. Basically, Ungrim can become a short-ass Terminator, who's considered the most powerful offensive lord in the entire Dwarven lineup. He can smash almost any opponent with the right equipment combined with his armour piercing, melee expert, and armoured traits. The only downside is that pretty much anyone can run away from him. Being a dwarf with little legs means he does struggle to keep up, the poor sod. Taking the third slot in the lineup is one Belagar Ironhammer from the King and the Warlord DLC. Belagar leads Clan Angrund in a seemingly Sisyphean task of retaking Karak 8 Peaks from the Greenskins. His main narrative goal in any campaign is to capture this distant mountain at all costs. With a throng of dwarves from across his clan, he will fight to the last drop of their blood to do it. Belagar is the distinct opposite of Ungrim as well. Where Ungrim Ironfist is more at home taking a swanton bomb off a ladder into a waiting horde of orcs, Belagar is a diminutive living fortress. I mean, look how much armour he's wearing. I'm surprised his beard doesn't have armour plating, so he can be the old world's version of Tony Stark, replete with ultimate attack, Unibeard. Basically, in any battle, Belagar is the anchor of your force. Send him to hold up the opposing enemy lord or large foe or even an entire unit of infantry, and he will hold the line. He has a few bonus traits that aid in this style of play, including charge defense against all, armored and shielded, and melee expert, further increasing his defensive stats in all areas. Outside of his own personal traits, however, Belegar also brings his team of ghosts to fight for him, who I'll cover a little later in the video. Moving on though, we have our next legendary lord in the form of Thorek Ironbrow. Ironbrow. Thorek is a free DLC lord who leads the Ironbrow faction on the campaign map. Thorek is old school as well. He isn't about making changes and mending bridges like Thorgrim far north of him, no. He remembers the good old days, when you could crush a Groby under a barrel of ale and hammer out a rune or two before going to bed with your favourite bearded wench. This dedication to the old ways makes him the best runesmith in the entire Dwarven world. Thorek can access the Anvil of Doom, which works as a mount, somehow, with which he can deliver all sorts of pain. He passively causes miscast damage to enemy spellcasters whenever they try to fling spells his way. Meanwhile, he can activate the Rune of Doom to massively boost friendly Dwarven melee damage. The thing even causes fear, which is a nice touch. On top of these abilities, it also grants magic resistance, essentially making Thorek one of the most damage-resistant stunties in the entire lineup of lords. And he needs these buffs. Starting in the deep south of the map near the Tomb Kings, Skaven and those Ponzi Bretonians, Thorek has his work cut out to ensure his expedition survives long enough to collect the lost Dwarven artifacts of old. Each one recovered grants further benefits to the faction. I guess he's the Dwarven version of Lara Croft, only with more facial hair and saggier tits. Finally, we have the most iconic of all dwarves in the Warhammer world, Grombrandal, the White Dwarf. This mad as a box of frogs looking lord was given away for free a while back for people who bought a copy of his regular publication, White Dwarf, way back when. Nowadays, he's free on Steam and is well worth picking up. Why, you say? Well, he's a tanky, fearless alternate leader of Karasakarak, with the Flash Bomb ability. As a frontline legendary lord, he never breaks, has armoured, armour-piercing and melee expert traits, and can basically flashbang units, reducing their speed and melee defense. It works on all enemy types as well, meaning that he can rapidly diminish enemy elites or special units solo, or hold up multiple units on his own while taking a fair number of them down in the process. He might not do as much damage as other lords, but his versatility really helps him stand out. I mean, outside of his plugged my finger into the main's hairstyle, he rocks. Long-range pointy things will kill him quickly though if he gets focused, but that rarely happens in a single-player run. So that covers the legendary lords of the Dwarven Kingdoms, each working in their own unique way, whether it be Thorgrim's steamrolling charges, Ungrim's steel cage combat, Belegar's ultimate defense, Thorek's anvil smashing, or Grombrandal's all-round effectiveness. There should be something for your style of play here. Of course, like the Empire, you won't have access to all of these impressive little warriors from the get-go, and when you need someone to lead your secondary armies, you can always recruit a lord from your lands. The major difference here is that the dwarves don't have as much diversity in lords. Only 2 are available, and frankly one is better than the other in terms of utility on the field. First we have the highly original titled Lord. Your average Dwarven Lord is a frontline melee combatant featuring armoured and shielded, charge defense against all, and melee expert traits. Honestly, this one's for the Gimli enthusiasts out there, you know who you are, who just wants a no-frills Dwarven army leader who can stand in the middle of a ruck, take a few heads, and be left to their own devices while you micromanage other parts of the battle. Now, the Rune Lord, on the other hand, is a little more interesting. I mean, his hat is impressive to begin with. You could balance a lot of ale on that, I bet. That aside, he remains a melee lord, who's also capable of invoking the Dwarven equivalent to magic in the form of runes. Runes work like passive buffs or active spells, giving buffs like immunity to psychology or armour piercing for allies. Rune Lords cast master versions of some runic spells, which can be even more powerful, and thus more effective on the field. Rune Lords also gain access to the Anvil of Doom. They must hand these things out when you pass your runesmithing test or something, which, like Thorek, means you don't need to use your legs anymore. What is it with dwarfs and their dislike of walking? Lazy. A lot of them. So, we've covered the lords and the legendary lords. Let's take a look at the heroes of the Dwarven Empire, shall we? Heroes are wonderful characters who can be useful on the battlefield and the campaign map, and can act as a kind of right-hand man for your general, seeking out powerful foes on the field to duel or buffing friendlies when they need it most. They're just as useful on the map, causing chaos in enemy territory or increasing your profits per turn, as a couple of examples. The Dwarves have a few base heroes available to all factions in the form of the Master Engineer, Runesmith, and Thane. Since I just covered the Rune Lord, let's take a quick look at the Runesmith. They haven't quite reached the level yet to be awarded one of those flat fancy hats, but they're working toward that lofty goal. Runesmiths, like any dwarf, are up for a scrap, so if needs must, they can get into the brawl, with the armoured trait keeping them going a little longer than your average beardo. Obviously, their main role is to provide runic magic support, cancelling enemy spells, buffing troops, and using the odd offensive skill. On the campaign map, they are extremely versatile. Your Runesmith is a dowie of many talents, from reducing the chance of ambushes, protecting settlements from enemy sabotage attempts, blocking magic, assaulting enemy settlements, reducing and cleansing chaos and vampiric corruption, and finally, being able to straight up assassinate a mother lover, the Runesmith. It's quite frankly essential to your faction's success off the field as well as on it. These guys are the Liam Neeson of the Dwarven realm. They have many talents, and they'll find you, and they will kill you. The Master Engineer is a different beast entirely. This ranged hero is the camper of the Dwarven army. He specialises in finding a comfy spot to snipe from and harass the enemy in chat when they complain about him staying in one place the entire battle. When called in to fight, they are best employed against large foes since they cause armour-piercing damage with each shot. Being a dwarf, they struggle to keep up with nimbler foes, so lumbering targets work best for them in most cases, though you'll mostly be using their passive buffs instead of their skills with ranged weaponry. Any friendly ranged unit or artillery within his aura gains bonuses to their firing range and reload speed, and this also stacks with other Master Engineers, so they can make artillery-themed army stacks incredibly deadly. Couple this with the entrenchment ability to reduce enemy counter-battery damage, and your ranged troops are even hardier. On the campaign map, they can reduce building costs, reduce enemy artillery ammunition, damage settlements and their walls, and cleanse corruption. Finally, we have the Thane. Similar to your Empire Captain from the prior video, please watch it, I'm begging you. The Thane is a perfect hero to supplement a melee-focused army. He doesn't fancy runic magic or tinker with war machines all day and set up a tent. No, the Thane likes to see that look in his enemy's eyes just before he bisects them with his axe. Unsurprisingly, the Thane is an armoured and shielded hero who can block most damage outside of armour piercing, and can use abilities like Deadly Onslaught for extra damage or Foe Seeker to increase his vigour and speed. No flips, just kicks where the Thane's concerned. With that said, Clan Angrund, led by Belagar Ironhammer, can recruit legendary heroes in the form of ghosts from ages past. How exactly these ghosts are called in is likely something a lore expert can inform me of down in the comments, but Angrund gets access to these rather useful spirits in their quest to bring Karak 8 Peaks under their control. You have 4 special short arses to command in the form of Dramar Hammerfist, die trying to hammer a trollhammer torpedo into the tube. Halkenhaf Stonebeard, diagnosed at a young age with stonebeardism, a tragic condition where one's beard is made of granite and slowly weighs the afflicted down until they can't move anymore. Throny Ironbrow put his name to the test one day against Philip Skullcrusher's hammer, and King Lun Ironhammer, who died straining too hard on the runic lav. Despite their past failings, however, they have returned to wipe the slate clean and get the job done. Throny, for instance, is a Master Runesmith, Dramar as a Master Engineer, while Halkenhaf and Lun are Thanes. They all work the same way as the normal heroes, but have the added benefit of being ethereal, so they ignore most damage from non-magical weaponry, and aren't hindered by rough terrain speed-wise. They also cause fear and terror, since most living things don't like being attacked by angry ghosts, which make them quite useful against greenskins and beastmen or Skaven, who all rely on their numbers to overcome their low leadership stats. Their attacks also count as magical, which makes them perfect to take on specialist units who have damage reduction against normal weapons. But enough about the glory hogs, let us go now to the real winners of any battle, the fighters of the Dwarven throng itself. And what better place to start than with the infantry, and more specifically miners. Oh, wait, miners. Phew. Miners are the basic cheap as chips infantry of the dwarf army. They are literally the crew who dig the numerous tunnels for the fortress cities, who've formed a regiment and gone out to fight in the front line. I'm not sure this would work so well in real life. Skilled labourers being sent to have a ruck with your enemy. I mean, would you really send out your kingdom's blacksmiths because some of them fancy the scrap? Nah, doesn't matter. It's fantasy, right? So who cares? Miners cause armour piercing damage, count as armoured, and are good against gates. Sure. Now, just because they have armour piercing and armoured doesn't mean that they can trade blows with mid-tier or high-tier units. Nah, they'll die quite quickly. You're actually best using them to harass the flanks of tougher units, since they get penalties for being flanked, or have miners in the rear line, ready to soak a cavalry charge meant for your artillery or quarrelers. Upon obtaining a gunsmith's forge in one of your settlements, you can access miners with blasting charges. Basically, these are miners with the added ability to now team kill, or waste ammo on trash infantry. You have to micromanage these limited explosives, or else the AI will just dump them all on a single target, so turn off fire at will for these troops. That said, as long as you hold your shot and use them when they can do the most damage, they can break units down quickly. Just be aware that despite being dwarves and fighting alongside other dwarves, they have zero concern for their fellow beardlings, and will casually toss nades into their own kind if the game says a target's in range and fire at will is on. You've been warned. Now, the mainstay of any good dwarven throng, the dwarf term for an army by the way, is your dwarven warriors. Naturally, they have the armoured and shielded traits, giving them good deflection rates against arrows and some damage reduction outside of old armour piercing. They also have charge defense against large foes to remove the bonus from larger creatures or cavalry. I guess those little legs give them more stability. Dwarf warriors are one of the hardier infantry in the entire game. They don't do a lot of damage compared to other general line infantry, but they're also tough as old boots. I mean, these are hardy folk that can be literally sent flying by a monster and simply get up, shout something incoherently and get back into the fight like nothing happened. The main use of a dwarven warrior is to use his face to tank the hits and wear down the foe as your more high damage units get into position to put the hurt on the enemy. When you unlock the armoury for one of your settlements, you get access to the more damage focused dwarf warriors with great weapons. These fighters forego the shield in favour of large two-handed weapons. These stout axe murderers eschew the shielded trait instead for the more killy armour piercing trait, while still keeping the armoured traits for themselves. Yeah. Great weapon dwarves aren't as hardy in the front line as your standard warriors, but actually work better in the good old flank and spank manoeuvre. Their higher damage output can quickly hew enemy units that are heavily armoured. That said, lighter infantry can counter great weapons due to their higher attack rate combined with the great weapon's lower defence. And now, a brief word from the Imperial charity, Beard Safe. Did you know that 1 in every 3 dwarf warriors suffers severe concussion from orc attack, goblin ambush, or accidental head injury in low tunnel ceilings every 3 minutes? These concussions can be amusing to watch as they stumble about grumbling and punching a noblar to death, but it is in fact very serious. We at Beard Safe ask for a small donation of oath gold every single day to help these poor, beleaguered dwarves. Just 2 oath gold every day can help these hirsute toddlers get a large bugman's ale, a new shield and beard accessory, giving them purpose and a renewed sense of battle lust for the horrific conflicts to come. Thank you for your time, and remember, be a hero. Beard Safe. Truly, truly great work they do over in Beard Safe, and I heartily recommend you check out their local chapter in your nearest Imperial town or city. They have a fun run every week. Continuing with the infantry, next we have the Longbeards. These old-timers are gruff, rough, and tend to speak off the cuff when dealing with youngsters of their race or, well, any friendly species of the dwarves. Longbeards are named as such due to their incredible facial hair, something the dwarves put a lot of stock into socially, by the way, and as such they're considered some of the best infantry a dwarf lord can have under their command. These grizzled vets have seen it all, from orc hordes to Skaven hives to League of Legends all chat, and survived to tell the tale. In terms of gameplay, the Longbeard is a tougher version of the Dwarf Warrior unit. They have the added benefit of the Old Grumblers trait, which actually improves the morale of other friendly units in range, making sure they don't flee when things get tough. A few of these peppered in the line can make sure your morale is stronger against larger forces or more specialised troops like undead, which cause fear and terror. They also work well as second line units, there to plug the gap when things get hairy. Well, hairier than it already is with all the beards anyway. With an armoury built in one of your kingdoms, you can also access the Longbeards with great weapons. I know, the naming convention is astoundingly original here, but stick with me, okay? Much like Dwarven warriors with great weapons, these work the same way but with better stats. They replace the shielded part of their traits with armour piercing, and keep the old Grumbler's trait. The top and bottom of it is that you use these crusty old buggers to kill anything with heavy armour that might think it can hang with the Dowie. They'll get a shock though, followed by a swift death when they finally do get within swinging range of those axes. Slayers are personally my favourite unit in the entire Dwarf roster. Amazing hair coupled with dual axes and a musical taste to match, the Slayer is a force to be reckoned with. Your average Slayer unit counts as anti-large, which makes sense since they're specially trained to butcher anything large. Death Blow means they never break, but more importantly this trait causes them to launch into a final, frenzied attack before dying, like a camper in a first-person shooter who's been rooted out of their hidey hole. Slayers are also considered fast for their species, and they're so monumentally badass that they're capable of deflecting arrows with their axes. Just picture the sight of a group of muscular short-asses with mohawks and tats going hell-bent for leather towards some archers, swinging their axes and actually deflecting incoming projectiles. It is simultaneously cool and stupid. Still, Slayers aren't bad units by any means. In fact, they're one of the best you can recruit for mid to late game campaigns. Most recommend using them to counter enemy flanking attacks from cavalry because their traits combine to allow them to deal damage quickly to large creatures like horses, but they also take down enemy monsters that can rush the front line. They're also best used to chase down fleeing units due to their previously mentioned speed. Well, fast for a dwarf anyway. Hammerers, however, are a more refined type of dwarf. They're clad in heavy armour, wield large crushing two-handed hammers to make things just as short as they are. These hammers are so powerful they count as armour piercing, while the MC Hammerer himself is well armoured. The final trait for the Hammerer is Damage Dealer, which basically means it's entirely geared around doing damage quickly and efficiently. If you find yourself going up against Hammerers, you'll want to focus them from range, or with spells to whittle them down, otherwise be prepared to take a sound beating. Unsurprisingly, given their nature as damage dealers over defensive combatants, they can take more casualties than other dwarf units. Well, maybe less than the Slayers, but Slayers expect to die, so they don't factor in as much. The best tactic with your Hammerers is to fix and flank a target, and ram these little clubbers into the side or rear of the enemy formation. Then just watch the bodies fly. Truly a glorious sight. Please allow me a use of the classic phrase, "Stop! Hammer time!" Thank you. Doubling back a little bit to our favourite Bemohawk Slayers, there's something a little more powerful and funkin' crazy in the Giant Slayer. Giant Slayers are those who have reached the pinnacle of combat prowess, and have either slain a true giant, or something of equivalent threat to the Dwarven race. As such, they are horrendously powerful fighters wielding large polearms, which would surely be a danger to themselves and others when being wielded, especially with those tiny arms. Either way, they trade the Matrix-style bullet-deflecting axes for the Death Blow trait. Death Blow activates and is constantly active when the target they're attacking is below 20% health, which then buffs the Giant Slayers by another 18% damage. It basically means they just kill stuff even quicker the closer they are to death. I liken it to going full Muso in Dynasty Warriors. Provided you don't let them get charged by heavy infantry, monsters or cavalry, they're perfect for going full killamajigging on the enemy. Try to use them in a similar manner to normal Slayers, and you have a unit that does more damage, more quickly, and 100% more brutally. Now that's metal! To finish the infantry lineup, there's no better unit than the Iron Breakers. Now they don't literally break iron, or maybe they do. I mean, they are dwarves. Yeah. Iron Breakers are the toughest infantry in the dwarf army, considered to be the elite of the elite for any throng. If you use a Gromrel stone on a miner, I'm told it will evolve them into Iron Breakers. I think that's how it works, because this unit has the same special function as miners with blasting charges, but with better stats. Iron Breakers have the usual armoured and shielded trait, charge defense against all, and special ranged weapon, which is the aforementioned explosive. It makes specific mention that they cannot throw bombs at airborne targets, but that's fine, you have Quarrelers to shoot things out of the sky. When you need an immovable object though against the unstoppable force, these Gromril armoured boys are your best option. They do decent damage as well, and have a high armour rating so they can absorb and dish out punishment equally. Just don't run them around much. All that armour makes them extremely heavy, and they're the slowest infantry unit on the field because of it. The last thing you want is for your Iron Breakers to suffer a coronary trying to chase down a goblin. Not the most dignified end for any dwarf. But now, with the infantry covered, let's see the front line of hairy battlers take the fight to the greenskins. I mean, they aren't the quickest to get there, but they'll get there eventually. Come to think of it, why aren't those orcs charging? Oh, bugger. Ranged units, of course. Why didn't I remember those from last time? Okay, reset, time out. Time to go back to the drawing board here and have a look at the dwarven ranged offerings. Now, generally when you think of dwarves, you picture the same thing. Axe or hammer in hand, big bushy beard, fancy armour, and sometimes a shield or a pointy helmet. You rarely, if ever, think of a dwarf wielding a ranged weapon, but in the old world, the dwarven kingdoms took to ranged combat with such gusto, they have some pretty effective skirmishers in their ranks. Your first ranged unit is the Quarrelers. I've made mention of these earlier because for a long time your army will feature a few of these useful deadeyes. The main takeaway with Quarrelers is they're comfortable in the scrum and behind the line. Seriously, they have the decent melee combatant trait and are armoured and shielded. This means that they can actually block some returning arrow fire while also being capable of slapping that flanking cav unit for being dumb enough to charge them. Even when they run out of ammo, the Quarrelers will just drop their crossbow and get into the fight, sometimes wielding a bolt as a makeshift shiv. Even the dwarven ranged units are tough in a fistfight. I mean, who would have guessed, right? Now, just like your average pint-sized warrior, the Quarrelers also have their own great weapon variant. Just apply the same basic principle to these as the Quarrelers before, but expect more damage in exchange for slightly higher casualties for them. Anything that has the trait decent melee combatant is an instant win though. Dwarfed range units are just the pinnacle when you think about it. Empire crossbowmen, they drop bricks when they're attacked. Bretonnian peasants, they're flummoxed by the changing of the seasons, let alone being able to defend themselves in a fight. Orc arrow boys I guess are a close second, but seriously, throughout the entire Old World roster, no race's missile infantry are just as effective in close combat as they are at dropping fools at range. So we know the Quarrelers can basically multitask like a boss, but what about pure ranged combatants? Well, the dwarves don't slouch there either. I mean, if they did slouch, their beards would probably touch the floor and they get all dirty. But that aside, we have the rangers, the sneaky gits of the Dowie. These cloaked ramblers can deploy ahead of the army to set up an ambush or a flanking position. They're fast, for a dwarf, like the Slayers, but also have the stalk ability. This basically allows them to move about in any terrain and remain hidden. I still don't know how it works, but compared to the Empire units that had stalk, I guess this can be explained a little easier due to their shorter stature that makes them tougher to see at a distance. The stalking means that they can lie in wait as units go past and then they can rush out and start shooting like a COD kid playing squad for the first time. Now, rangers aren't as comfortable in the scrum as Quarrelers. I mean, they'll certainly knock out a gobbo or two without too much effort, but anything more specialised will kill them quickly. What won't get killed quite as quickly are the rangers with, you guessed it, freaking great weapons. Dwarves cannot get enough great weapons, can they? I can't but feel that every facet of dwarven society has a great weapon version. Farmers, and farmers with great weapons. Barman, and barman with great weapon. Scribe, and scribe with bloody great weapon. Was some past declaration made that I didn't know about where every unit has to have a variant with a whacking great axe in there? Regardless, rangers with great weapons work the same as rangers, but have armour piercing and better damage, but they die quicker due to the whole handling a two-handed weapon and no shield. The main difference here is that instead of thumping bolts into their targets, great weapon rangers actually throw axes. It means that they have less range, but better armour piercing. Honestly, they just work behind the front line until they run out of axes, and then you just right-click and throw them into the meat grinder. Thunderers, however, are tons of fun. If you like the Empire and their black powder units, then Thunderers will tickle that fancy for you, nay bother. Chunderers fire armour-piercing rounds. Counters armoured and shielded, again, are decent melee combatants. The Dowie flexibility to just go bugger it and grab an axe and start swinging is so refreshing. It isn't all roses though. Like their Imperial counterpart, they have to have a clear line of sight to shoot targets or they won't be able to fire at all because they'd shoot friendlies. They can shoot flying foes however easy enough behind the line, and bigger targets like trolls or your mum without any issue. Cavalry can and will mess them up if not protected from a flanking charge, so keep them safe and they'll keep putting holes in things. Iron Drakes, on the other hand, are accidents waiting to happen the first time you use them. Dwarves with flamethrowers never seem like a smart idea when you consider how much beard hair is around on the battlefield just waiting to be ignited. Ugh, the smell would be burnt hair, ale and pork pies. Ugh. No doubt your first experiment with Iron Drakes will result in some friendly fire, eh? You get me? Yeah, whatever. Team kill squads like these are best deployed against horde factions like Skaven and Orcs. Walls of fire tend to dissuade cheap units from running headlong into them and can quickly rout numerous poorly armoured units. Apparently heavy armour is far less affected by fire, so heavier armoured units will take more time to be persuaded to catch fire and die. Positioning then is key with Iron Drakes. When aimed at the right angle, they can utterly ruin enemy troops and cause routs all along the line. Your best bet though is to keep these units behind the line to move later on into the flanks, or to pepper them along your line so they can blaze oncoming infantry before they can charge. Iron Drake units are relatively small, don't laugh at the obvious joke, and they don't work as well on a scrap. They still do better damage than average missile troops, but they're so small of a unit. Stop laughing, I can hear you. They can be swarmed quite easily, so keep them out the fight. This means more micromanagement, if done correctly. It can be quite nasty for the enemy. If flamethrowers aren't your thing, but you still want some handheld punch for your stubby-fingered fighters, then the Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes are the unit for you. In essence, these dwarves use RPGs to bring down large foes, or splash multiple infantry per shot. Their projectiles count as anti-large with armour-piercing missiles. The Iron Drakes themselves are armoured as well, so they don't die too quickly if charged, but that said, they're still a comparatively small unit. Stop chuckling again in the back. So they can be brought down quite quickly by larger infantry units or light cavalry. They also have a low rate of fire since they have to reload and clear the backblast before firing again, so like the normal Iron Drakes, you'll need to micromanage the troops to get the best out of them. Combined with a Runesmith or Lord's Wrath and Ruin runes, they can increase their effectiveness against pretty much anything. Who doesn't want a gang of RPG-toting dwarves, eh? Only a Wazzock doesn't want one. That's who. The final ranged unit is Bugman's Rangers. Now right off the bat, they don't have any real standout skill compared to regular Rangers. They're fast-ish, have vanguard deployment, charge defense, they stalk. They're better melee fighters, apparently, so they can last longer in a fight compared to a normal Ranger unit. The one thing that makes them really useful is their ability to self-heal. I'm guessing maybe they used a weak version of the Super Soldier Serum and have some of the legendary Captain Dowie's powers, sans his shield of course. Though I think the real source of their power is their ale. Some liquid courage before a fight always helps with the aim, I'm told. A decent unit to bring when you want to upgrade your standard Rangers to the Bugman branded versions. But now with the Throng augmented by some of the best hybrid melee infantry in the old world, there's literally nothing that can quickly run down troops, and I should have seen that coming. Well, I mean, they didn't run instantly, but a hard counter to these fast movers would be useful. Time for the Dwarf Cavalry! The Dwarves never really got into the whole cavalry fad like basically everyone else did. I mean, even the Beastmen brought Centaurs. No, the Dowie are horseless. Hell, they don't even have chariots. What the Dwarves did decide to go with, though, I actually admit, was quite ingenious. Yes, flying machines. Gyrocopters, to be exact. Each one built for a particular role on the field and very powerful. Though they lack the numbers of a standard cavalry unit, they have the ability to fly over the enemy and harass them to death with a number of icky, painful weapons like steam cannons, brimstone guns, or just good old explosives. Let's have a look at the basic gyrocopter, eh? So, it's best to get it out of the way at the start here. The gyrocopter is not the old world version of an Apache or Hind gunship. When it has ammo for its steam gun and bomb dropper, it will for some unbeknownst reason decide to then get into the melee and will quickly die if it does. So keep them moving and away from the battle line when they're being employed in your nefarious schemes. Gyrocopters are fast, like Airwolf fast, and very few airborne units can actually keep pace with them. It means that you can move them to the right flank or the left flank of the enemy, and when the time is right, move them in for the steam and bang, kinky, and then move off. They can quickly murder a bunch of archers, or better yet, get the artillery of the enemy early in the fight, rendering their biggest punch inert before the battle is truly met. Don't fly them right toward any ranged unit though with armour piercing, or leave them in the firing line of any archers either for that matter. They'll still catch projectiles easily enough, and Bomber in the cockpit has trouble flying with an arrow in his eye, funnily enough. The Brimstone gun variant is a little more specialised. It doesn't have the ammo or unit size to quickly kill lots of infantry, but it does kill specific targets quite quickly, like trolls, heavy cavalry, giants, or anything large with a smaller unit size, like minotaurs for instance. They're counted as anti-large and armour-piercing, they are firing lava, so the combo can put any of the enemy's prime fighters out of the fight pronto tonto. The final flying marvel of the Dowie is the Lancaster bomber equivalent in the Gyro Bomber. This is a very specialised piece of equipment. It can do tremendous damage to infantry blobs with its heavy bombs, but you only get a single bomber per unit, and if the enemy ever pierces the armour, it dies quickly. This can make it something of a double-edged sword for you, and might be something you want to take with you when you're campaigning against factions that rely on larger numbers of troops to overwhelm you, like Undead or Skaven or Flat Earthers. Personally, I like these whirlybirds of doom. They may take more management to come back safe, but to this day, the Zufbar Bell has flown over 50 sorties and has never once been damaged. Right, with the mighty air forces of the Dowie under my command, we can check the enemy infantry, the enemy archers, and those dastardly cavalry. I mean, sure, they could start throwing huge rocks or use warpstone cannons, but my dwarves are so small that, they wouldn't hit them. Fine. These Wazzicks want to fight with their big toys, sure. I can slap back with firepower, more so than they can handle. Artillery is something the dwarves take great pride in. The Empire have some decent cannon on their lines, but they mostly just copied the ancient dwarven metalwork, and even then only managed a poor copy at best. No, dwarven craftsmanship is the best in the old world, regardless of what some pointy-eared elf might say. Each piece is a work of art. Extremely deadly and powerful art, but art nonetheless. Up first we have the ancient but highly reliable and killy bolt thrower. Numerous forces across the old world employ these weapons, but none quite like the dwarves. Their mechanical prowess means they can fire further and more accurately than any other bolt thrower out there. Even the band bolt thrower have one for stage performances built in the dwarven forges of Karazakarak. It goes without saying that the bolt thrower is best employed against single large targets, with its armour-piercing missiles and anti-large traits. The rate of fire is good, but the range compared to a cannon is lower. Also, the bolts don't do as much splash damage, so firing on enemy infantry or cavalry will only result in a couple of casualties. I mean, those casualties are extremely dead, but just not enough of them die per shot to make it useful in the anti-infantry role. Of course, don't leave it unprotected because it'll die very quickly. Sticking with the older artillery pieces, we have the Grudge Thrower. These catapults are actually the first artillery piece you'll gain access to in any dwarven campaign, and they're extremely versatile. Being able to fire arcing chunks of masonry at targets that skip like stones across water, though in this case it's the ground and the ripples created are made of body parts of your foes, it's quite the scene, but also very satisfying. The projectiles are quite slow, however, and enemies can avoid them easily enough if they pay attention, but the range forces enemy AI usually to attack you rather than you having to march over toward them, which works great for dwarves given the tiny legs and the slow movement issue. Large infantry blobs will be squished flat under the fire of these machines, and when possible, bring a couple for double the fun and increase fire rate. Again, be aware of those pesky fast movers and airborne troops, and their penchant for flanking attacks. For something a bit more now, we have the Dwarven Cannon. The cannon is a nice complement to the Grudge Thrower. Both have the same range and virtually similar firing rate, making them useful for both roles as anti-infantry and cavalry killer, while the Grudge Thrower can squish slower moving infantry for you. Cannons are more accurate as well, so they can pick a specific bigger target and punch holes in them over great distances, and they're better at knocking down walls and gates compared to the Grudge Thrower. That said, it needs protection to avoid the dreaded flanker or airborne attacker, while also needing some height to fire over your friendly forces, which visually is hilarious given the short nature of dwarves. I mean, when they say they need a hill to set up on, I'm sure they mean a small increase in elevation, like a molehill or a bump in the land. The organ gun is next, and what a beauty she is. This quad-barreled, death-dealing son of a bearded mother is the centrepiece of any self-respecting throng. A high rate of fire, good accuracy, decent range and capability to engage any enemy unit comfortably means these are your pinnacle artillery piece. When available, you'll want at least one in the army with some height to shoot over your troops' heads, without too much grumbling from the infantry below. Paired with cannons, these guns can simply wreck horde armies before they get a chance to do their swarming attack, or at least arrive at the front line sans half their mates who now decorate the ground somewhere behind them. The usual drawbacks apply: don't let them get flanked, attack from the air, or feed them after midnight, and you should be golden. The final unit of the Dwarven roster is the most exotic of the Dwarven artillery, the Flame Cannon. Quite why these hirsute battlers want to keep risking life and beard with fire is a mystery to me, but anyone in front of these guns will be faced with a rather different conundrum, to be honest. Flame cannons are pure anti-infantry weapons with a short range that's perfect for belting fire into oncoming hordes. Like previous flame-based units, heavy armour is somehow more resistant to fire, so these weapons work better against light armoured troops. Their armour piercing can be increased with a master engineer overseeing operations, however. A small hill is needed to give it a clear line of sight for firing, and obviously don't let it get wet, flanked by cavalry, or eaten by flying monsters. Honestly, it isn't the most appealing artillery piece given its higher cost and late game development when you already likely have a good organ gun cannon duo in your armies by then. Still, when money isn't an issue, a few of these can be fun to toss around with to burn some stuff with. And that's it. The dwarves don't deal in magic like the Empire or most other races, and mounted units are non-existent. Short and sweet really, just like a dwarf. Remember to raise an ale to Bugman, pray to the ancestor gods, and keep your axe sharp, for it's said you're rarely a few feet away from a Raki, Groby, or Creationist. Kazukan Kazakid, ha! Thanks for watching everybody, have a good week, I'll see you next time.